Tonight I've actually been asked to talk about gender fluidity, the research behind it, gender dysphoria and health risks. I'll be giving you a very brief overview and point you to where you can get some further information. Gender fluidity is taught in all of the programs being rolled out from preschool to universities. The way that it is described in All of Us, the health and physical education resource for year 7 to 8 students, so 11 to 14-year-olds, is gender refers to the way you feel on the inside. It might be expressed by how you dress or how you behave, and for some people these things may change over time. For about 4% of people, their gender may not align with the sex they were assigned at birth, and that's okay. The materials go on to say in a different place, gender isn't quite as simple as whether you're male or female. Everyone has their own gender identity in relation to masculinity and femininity. Some identify with both, and some don't identify with either. It's up to the individual to describe what gender identity fits them best. There are a whole range of different words people use to describe their gender identity. Other materials that will be teaching the same ideas include Catching On Early for preschool children, the Building Respectful Relationships program, and Catching On Later. Please look up these materials and read them for yourselves. A book for young children, The Gender Fairy, tells you, no one can tell you if you are a boy or a girl, only you know. Children are being taught that male and female is not determined by your biology, but rather by your feelings. If I feel like I'm a girl, then I am a girl. If I feel like I'm a boy, then I'm a boy. And with gender fluidity, this can change from day to day, hour to hour even. So today I'm a boy, tomorrow I'm a girl. That's what gender fluidity means. One of the dangers of teaching this to children is it interferes with their ability for reality testing. They lose the ability to differentiate between what is real and imagination. Feelings are not facts. This is a very dangerous ideology and completely unscientific. I just wanted to show you what happens when feelings are taken to be facts. Dennis Avner was known as Catman, and it's really a very sad, tragic story. He paid lots of money for surgeries and in the end was in a lot of financial distress and continued to be in psychological distress because as much as he believed he was a cat, he wasn't a cat. And this is actually really tragic. He did suicide in a garage alone and financially corrupt. So this is where, if we take the extreme of my feelings are facts, this is where the end of that ideology leads to. I can be anything. Gender dysphoria is really distressing. It's a really difficult condition. A psychological condition where there is distress, and often do describe feeling like being a boy in a girl's body or a girl in a boy's body. Often this is based in trauma. Those with gender dysphoria will never be fully free of their distress without coming to understand the true cause of their psychological distress. For example, one small boy felt like he should be a girl, made the comment, "My dad and mum would love me if I was a girl." When his younger sister was born with disabilities, understandably, she took a lot of the parents' attention. In this young boy's mind, his good parents loved her and not him. They were able to work through this in a healthy way because they came to understand where his feelings came from. Mazina has mentioned the tragic story of a friend in Western Australia. I also know this mum. You know, being anally raped for a girl, that is a horrendous trauma for anyone to go through. She never had any gender dysphoria before that incident. that was based in psychological trauma. And for people to come and identify her as transgender because of that trauma has completely destroyed this young girl's life. She has not received the psychological counselling and help for that trauma rape that she deserves and needs. My dad never wanted girls. He was a farmer, and to him, boys were important. I often wonder if I was in school learning what young children are being taught today, would I actually be messed up believing that I am a boy in a girl's body because of my rejection and the trauma that I went through for years from feeling like I was not accepted as a girl? I actually was severely bullied in school. I remember quite often in high school I would be beaten up at the back gate about every 2 weeks. I would completely support any true anti-bullying program. What I am talking about tonight is not an anti-bullying program. If it was, as someone who was tragically bullied and left school the day I turned 15 because of it, the day I was legally able to, I would support it wholeheartedly. So I want to just show you a few of the things that you will find within the program. One of the young people in all of us is Nevo. He's described as a positive and confident young person with the same hopes and dreams as many young people. He tells a powerful story about growing up with the knowledge that the female sex assigned to him at birth did not match who he knew he truly was. This young man is held up as a role model and now advocates for genderlessness. In a recent interview about his book, Finding Nevo, he states, "I used to identify as a man. I used to identify as a woman. But right now, that's not relevant to me. I see myself as a mosaic of femininity and masculinity." This is the normalization of gender confusion. You will often hear the inaccurate terms in these materials, sex assigned at birth. We are not assigned our sex at birth by a doctor, a nurse, or anyone else. Our sex is biologically determined. There is no scientific evidence for a boy's brain in a girl's body or a girl's brain in a boy's body. Endocrinologist Michael Laidlaw, regarding Jazz, a male transitioning into a female, he writes, "There are 46 chromosomes in every human cell, assuming normal development. Females have 2 X chromosomes, and males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. These sex chromosomes are present in every cell in the body, assuming normal development. They remain in the cells from conception until death and do not change. It follows from this that since Jazz is male, every cell of his brain has an X and a Y chromosome, whereas a girl brain would have 2 X chromosomes. Therefore, Jazz has in fact a boy brain right down to the very level of the DNA. The idea for treating gender dysphoria as transgender came from Dr. John Money. His theory was, instead of making the brain fit the body, let's make the body fit the brain. I have an idea. Let's see how this works. Very unscientific. What few know is his social experiment, while publicly written about by him as a success, was a complete failure. He was a complete fraud. David Reimer, the boy he experimented on, never adapted to being a girl, as Dr. Money claimed, and tragically suicided. This didn't stop Dr. Money and others from pushing on with their transgender agenda. Sadly, doctors, psychologists, paediatricians, psychiatrists, and anyone else that brings up the science are labelled bigots, transphobic, and a variety of other names. Ironically, Talking about the very real harms associated with taking testosterone and estrogen and the mutilation of healthy body parts, how dangerous and unscientific this is. Talking about these things will get you labelled as dangerous and unscientific by activists, as I have been targeted as well. I can almost guarantee that were anyone here from mainstream media, I would be named, shamed and defamed for my presentation tonight. Many professionals have personally spoken to me about their concerns, but would not dare make a statement publicly or in their workplace. And that is how this radical ideology has progressed. Rather than debating the science, let's debate the science. Let's not call people names, but that's how it's progressed, is those of us who dare to dispute it are bullied and shamed into silence. Gender ideology teaching is extremely confusing for children and dangerous. It comes as no surprise that as this myth is being taught in our schools, rates of gender confusion and dysphoria, distress from being born male or female, are rapidly increasing. Putting children on hormones and puberty blockers has huge health risks. A major neglect of duty of care is the lack of information that children and young people are given about these drugs. It is reckless to teach this theory, this unproven dangerous ideology as fact. Chest binding, body mutilation, hormone replacements, and other unsafe, lifelong altering drugs will never be the answer to feeling happy with one's body and self. A physical solution to a psychological problem is not the answer. It's like giving someone with anorexia, a severe eating disorder, surgery such as a lap band. The reason why suicide rates remain just as high for those that choose to transition to the opposite sex, even in Sweden, where it is very friendly to be transgender, is because they have never dealt with the root cause of their distress for underlying trauma. Many wake up and find out they were never wrong in the first place. If you Google detransitioners, you will gain a greater understanding of the damage that is done as some very brave young people share their experiences. The compassionate and truthful thing to do is to enable children to be comfortable and mature in their biological sex, to grow up feeling comfortable in the skin they are born in. It's a problem in the mind, not the body. There is also a dangerous push to erase boy and girl and man and woman as normal, part of the sexual diversity message. The All of Us unit guide instructs students to use inclusive terms, gender. Where possible, avoid using gendered terms. For example, use words like workforce instead of manpower and police officer instead of policeman. Phrases like ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls should be avoided. I've had teachers tell me they can't say boys and girls in the classroom because they can actually get into trouble for that. When speaking about individuals, be sure you know and use their preferred pronoun, she, he, they. If unknown, ask that person or use their name instead. And one of the things is there's no place in these programs for respectful disagreement and respectful dialogue. And so if you're not an ally, if you're not someone who's saying, yes, we have to do this, then obviously you're an enemy. So it actually really makes kids being with different sets of values being put into a very difficult position, and often those kids are bullied. So a program that's meant to stop bullying is actually causing bullying of other kids. I heard of a story of a 3-year-old girl in a class in Canada who played with boys' toys. The teacher told the girl, "You must be a boy in a girl's body." I thought we were getting away from those stereotypes, you know. It doesn't matter if a child chooses one toy or another toy. Just because a girl chooses a boy's toy does not make that girl a boy. The child went home distressed. When the parent went into the school to discuss this the following day, they were told they were being homophobic, a bigot. There was no understanding for the distress that they had caused to this child. The American College of Pediatricians states, conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and helpful is child abuse. Safe Schools type programs also teach children and young people they have the right to sex. Children and young people taught they have the right to sex, and often include sexually graphic content which stimulates brain development towards sexual excitement. These programs prematurely awaken sexuality. One resource states, sexuality is how people feel and express themselves as sexual beings. Sexuality is an integral part of life. It starts at birth. No, kids have sexual organs, but they're not sexual beings at birth. If a primary student asks, this is what they're taught in their materials for teachers, if a primary school student asks, what is a clitoris, the teacher's told to say, a little round bump about as big as a pea, which is just above the opening to where the wee comes out. It feels good when you touch it. How creepy telling this to a primary school children. Anal sex is discussed again and again, with no mention of the associated risks, such as damage to the sphincter, which leads to fecal incontinence, a reason even many gay men don't engage in anal sex. Higher rates of STDs. Whenever STDs are discussed, it's not avoid, test and manage, test and manage. Avoidance is never discussed. A young teenager told me when she was asked in a class how to avoid STDs and she replied, her opinion, not have sex, she was virtually scoffed at by the educators. In a role play for 14 to 15-year-olds, there is a warning. After the activity to de-roll, ask the students their real names, how they are feeling right now, and where they are. This is important to ensure none of the role players have slipped into a state of distress or dissociation. I would argue if an activity has the slightest risk of causing dissociation for a teenager, a traumatic response, it has no place in a school classroom. A New South Wales resource explains that in grooming a child for sexual abuse, first, sexualise the relationship through conversation, expose the child to sexual materials and images, and then shape the child's sexual preferences by manipulating what the child finds exciting. Well, these programs are actually full of content that allows a teacher who would be so inclined to groom children, gives them a legitimate excuse to talk with students about what are your sexual preferences, etc. I know of children who've been sexually abused in both state schools and private schools before they ever had this kind of program. This will make it even harder to detect who those teachers are. It gives them a license. Do you believe children are sexual beings from birth?
No.
Yeah, I don't either. However, if you Google that term, children are sexual beings from birth, you will see this claim being made everywhere. Some of the websites includes Early Childhood Australia, a place preschool educators get their information from, True Relationships and Reproductive Health, Advocates for Youth website, Autism Speaks, Planned Parenthood, Raising Children, the Australian parenting website, and I've got here a quote for you. Normal toddler sexual behaviour. Your toddler might touch or rub his genitals, show his genitals to someone else. Is this really normal for your toddler to walk up and show their genitals to someone else? Look at or touch the genitals of familiar children or adults in a fun way during play. If a young child had done any of that, that would actually give me concern. Why is this child looking at sexual parts of an adult? That would actually be a real concern to me. The South Eastern Centre Against Sexual Assault and Family Violence, on their website here in Victoria, they make these claims that boys orgasm in boys from 3 months and orgasm in girls from 4 months. How shocking that a service against sexual abuse is repeating the myth that has led to the sexual abuse of so many. I have sent emails to them expressing my concern. They have been unable to provide the specific evidence for the research to support their claims. Alfred Kinsey is known as ushering in the sexual revolution with his so-called groundbreaking research. He actually studied insects, that's where his studies were, but nonetheless, he became the world's greatest sexologist. Many of the lies of the sexual revolution are based on Alfred Kinsey's flawed conclusions, such as the lie that children are sexual from birth. Alfred Kinsey paid pedophiles for his research. His 1948 book, Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male, clearly convicts him of his crimes. Kinsey and his associates used children ranging from 5 months to 14 years in his sex experiments. This is documented in Table 34 of the book. The description used to describe what they call orgasms includes extreme tension with violent convulsion, gasping, whole body or parts of it spasmodically twitching, groaning, sobbing or more violent cries, extreme trembling, collapse, loss of colour and sometimes fainting. What we are hearing sounds like severe child abuse to me, not sexual pleasure. Educators used to be mandated to report sexualised behaviour in children as a concern, and rightly so. Sexualised behaviour in children is one of the major indicators of child sexual abuse. Now teachers are being told it's normal to see early sexualisation of children, putting children at great risk. As an adult who has recovered from child sexual abuse, I don't want any child to be subject to the pain I was subjected to. Sexual abuse steals a child of their innocence and places a deep shame within them, damaging them to the core of their being. I also believe that subjecting children to graphic sexual images, such as the Year 7 students who are shown movies of anal sex, is a form of child sexual abuse. Teaching anal sex as just another way of sexual pleasure without any of the risks is a massive neglect of our duty of care. It's very dangerous. Yet this is what is happening. In many cases, anal sex is being glorified. How horrific that young people are receiving such a dangerous message that an unhealthy, unsafe practice is safe. Children are told to monitor and manage STDs. That is part of being sexually active. This is a lie. There are many sexually active adults that are at no risk. A man and a woman in a monogamous relationship for life are not at risk of developing STDs. That's just a fact. Another question students are asked is how they feel about threesomes. Yes, they're being asked, how do you feel about threesomes? And they're expected to answer that in the classroom. When I was at school, sexual education was about prevention and protection. Now it's all about pleasure and promiscuity. As someone who was taught to value purity, I avoided sexual materials. When I was in my late 30s studying counselling and family therapy, I was required to study sexual addictions as a part of my training. Having to look at these images really messed with my mind and my emotions in a lot of ways. I had never desired to look at pornography. Now, because of these educational materials that were teaching sexual addictions, including pornography, now I had this desire within me. I was in my late 30s. My frontal cortex lobe, the part of the brain that understands consequences, was fully developed. This experience gave me an insight into how difficult it must be for young people who have a desire for purity to deal with the images they are exposed to in our modern, progressive, pleasure-filled sex education. Young people who are known to take risks because the decision-making part of their brain is not yet developed. Young people who are dealing with hormones raging through their bodies, So just thinking about someone attractive can cause sexual arousal. These feelings can be intense, confusing, sometimes even overwhelming. This is the worst time to be putting sexual images in front of them. I believe many of the current education materials are leading to a deep confusion about what love is, confusing love with lust. Apart from pedophiles, Alfred Kinsey used many people in prison for sexual crimes as the basis of his research. He did not use the general population, but specific, highly promiscuous adults for his research. He also claimed that sexual promiscuity is the norm and that 10% of the population is homosexual. This has led to the enablement of radical activists and sexual militants writing a lot of the current materials taught to our young children, and this needs to be stopped. Please understand this is completely different to loving and supporting people. I want to affirm what was said earlier. We have nothing against anyone who identifies as lesbian, gay, transgender, bi. What we don't want is we don't want children being introduced to materials and ideas that they're not ready for, that they shouldn't have to be. A quote I heard in a news broadcast in Canada: "Parents' rights are limited and children's rights are put ahead. So the child has a right to be protected from the parents." This is not far from what is happening in Australia. High school teacher Moira Deming states, "Parents are being seriously undermined in my opinion here, and teachers are the little foot soldiers that have to go out and do it." Scott Morrison was quoted in the papers this week as sending his children to private school because he doesn't want the values of others forced on his children. He also said every parent should have this right, currently unavailable to those who can't afford private schools. As parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, really anyone who cares about the welfare of children, we have to stand up for the rights of children to have an education free from sexualisation and radical, dangerous, unscientific theories. Thank you so much.